All right, we are live, and I'm just going to do a quick roll call for commissioners. So if you are present or here, to say present or here. I see most of you, but it's always good to hear your voice anyway. So, Mr. Bennett.
Here.
Samantha.
Present.
Emily.
Present.
Ronald Hampton.
Here.
Lashunda.
Here.
Corwin, who I don't think is on yet, and Sultan, who is not present. All right, I'll hand it back over to you, Lashunda.
All right, thank you so much, Blaine. So I do want to just file on the front end that we, for the panel and the bulk of our conversation today, the facilitation is going to come from our fellow commissioner. I think that might be who just joined on the phone. Commissioner Knight, is that you?
That's Jennifer with Impact Justice.
Oh, okay. Well, you're also welcome. Hello. But that part of the conversation will be facilitated by Commissioner Knight. We're really excited to be joined by some panelists who I think will be able to engage us in a really rich discussion today. I really want to just start our conversation today just kind of acknowledging what all the things that are happening in the world and in DC in particular right now. And just express my gratitude and appreciation for everyone taking time to join this meeting today and engage in this really important conversation and this important work on this commission and on this committee in particular. And I want to, acknowledge that this week is a tough week for lots of people and for probably many people who are a part of this commission and on this committee. And that I really appreciate the work that all of you do and you being willing to be present here today. And in many ways, I've been really reminded of and thinking a lot about Martin Luther King and his work, about why we can't wait, right? So we focus a lot on the letter from Birmingham jail that's included in there, but what he really talks about in that is that there comes a point where there's a boiling over, right? There's an urgency to this work. And it's regardless of politics, it's regardless of whether something is feasible or not. You get to a point where an oppressed people demand justice, right? And they demand urgency, they demand action. And I think in so many different ways, both in DC and across the country, we are seeing people publicly express their grief and their trauma and their anger and their passion and their love for their communities and demanding that we don't wait anymore. And I really would hope that our work takes lessons from that. And part of what I'm hoping in our conversation today, as we're hearing from people who are from DC, who have lived this, who have been on the front lines of this work, that we walk away with a sense of urgency in everything that we do and the recommendations that we craft. But first and foremost, thank you for being here tonight amidst all of the things that might be weighing on you this week. So I want to start with that. So we are, of course, joined today by our team from Impact Justice. I know that we talked previously in our last meeting. We listed off a lot of things that we wanted them to be able to provide and work on. I know Bethany provided a brief update on some materials. I think in terms of the pace and sort of the cadence of you getting information is one of the things that we really talked about, right? So that you would get information before meetings, in time for meetings, those sorts of things, meeting summaries. And so I think that we can anticipate in our future meetings having more of a regular cadence and calendar for how you're receiving information. And I don't know if Bethany or anyone from Impact, if you had any other updates on information or you mentioned what you uploaded to the shared drive.
No, you captured kind of where we are right now, currently putting together some tools so that we can kind of in a more organized way start collecting those requests for information as well as the recommendations that we're hearing come out of these meetings and then smaller group meetings for kind of bigger group feedback. So we're working on kind of getting those in place, but we'll share them once we have them. But kind of at this moment, we will be taking notes and tracking what's happening in the meetings, and then providing that back to you after the meeting. So in terms of notes and kind of in working with Lashonda and Sultan on kind of planning ahead for the meetings and providing the follow-up afterwards. So we're still kind of getting organized on our end and getting those tools in a better place to share, and hopefully get us on our way to that cadence that you're talking about.
Thank you. Any questions about that for Impact Justice? Or any questions for Impact Justice generally? Okay. So as I said, we were going to transition right into our guest speakers in our panel, but Corwin hasn't joined us as of yet. So reach out to him real quick just to see if he needs a few more minutes. My apologies, everyone. Just ask for your patience for just a second. And if not, then if our panelists and guests don't mind, I can go ahead and get us started, if you don't mind that, and being Corwin free. And then when he joins, he can jump in. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. So primarily, I'm gonna let y'all take it. So as we mentioned in our previous meetings, one of the things we wanted to make sure that we were grounded in as we are moving this work forward is really understanding what violence looks like across communities here in DC. And so in conversation with many of you, specifically with Commissioner Knight, he mentioned a lot of his colleagues that he thought would be able to bring that level of expertise and insight to this committee and to this commission as we're thinking about developing recommendations and responses. We've done quite a bit of work so far talking to programs and agencies and things like that. But I think that there's nothing that can replace talking to folks about what actually is happening in communities and neighborhoods. And so what I'm hoping for the conversation today, and I'll hand it off to our guests who are joining us today, is to really talk about their work, their experiences, and give us a sense of what the landscape actually looks like here in DC, and how this works across DC neighborhoods. And so I will start with just asking that you give us a brief introduction, and then we can go right into the conversation. So Mr. Lewis, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tony Lewis. I'm a native Washingtonian. I've been working with hard to serve populations in the city for 20 years, working in violence interruption initially and continuously. But my I think my sort of what I'm known for the most is my work in reentry. And working with returning citizens, and also as a community organizer and leader here in the city. Mr. Knight.
He is not with us. Mr. King?
Oh, Mr. King.
Good afternoon. My name is Charles King. Currently working capacity working with youth juvenile justice system. I work with Credible Messenger. Also the founder of a nonprofit that does violence intervention work and outreach, returning citizen, native Washingtonian, born and raised in this city. I've had the opportunity, as Tony said, to collaborate with him on a lot of things that he's actively done and doing in the community at the current time. And I think that I was picked just because of my knowledge in the community and my interaction with the youth during this time, as well as some of the adults.
So from here, you guys, I mean, I don't know if you guys want to ask specific questions. I mean, the idea of violence in this city, I think, is a pretty broad subject matter. What I can say, if I can just make a couple comments that I hope grounds this conversation, is that this conversation is Black.
Lewis. So sorry. I just wanted to note that I think we just were joined. Oh, I thought I saw Corwin. I'm sorry. Perhaps I'm wrong. Okay. Sorry about that. I thought I saw him just join. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Lewis. I'm sorry.
No worries. I was just saying, I think it's important to look at what's going on in this city or who is happening to, who's been really impacted by the violence in this city, and how even with all the change in demographics, the people the most impacted have continued to be Black people from DC. I think in today's Washington, the violence is much more interpersonal. It's still some crew related stuff, but I think it has a new complexity when you start talking about interpersonal violence. I think we cannot have this conversation of violence without having an economic conversation. Again, when you look at Black Washingtonians or Black Native Washingtonians, all of the look at the median income gap, you look at incarceration rates, and again, it reflects in the victims of violent crimes and the perpetrators. So I think in any remedy or recommendations that need to go forward has to be tied to some economic plan. Growing up here all my life in an impoverished community, I don't know where we've ever seen a non-violent poor community. And I think so I think this issue of class and race has to be at the forefront. And I think DC is an incredible example of how, even with Black leadership, my whole 40 years, you've seen our criminal justice system be represented by Black people, not just Black people, but specifically Black people from DC. And I think gentrification has also played a part in the violence that we see today. You've seen neighborhoods condensed. You've seen people from all different parts of the city moved in and have to live amongst each other. And we don't really, I think that's had an impact on how communities exist. You have pretty much strangers living amongst each other just across the city in general, even from gentrified communities to communities that are all Black, but it's still people that weren't necessarily around each other a long time. You got people just moving in together. And so with that, I think that's created a lot of instability, a lack of cohesion, and created even barriers for interruption, just because you don't have sort of the historic bonds and relationships that you've had. And when you talk about 40 years of hyper mass incarceration and violence, people aren't as connected as they once were in terms of these relationships and these bonds. That's why people like Booby or people like Mr. King are so important. An individual that has relationships, and the key to this is relationships. Same with myself. And so as it relates to the police department, if those relationships aren't built, genuine relationships, not relationships built to extract information to send people to prison, but relationships is really rooted in the genuine development, safety, and empowerment of the people that live in those communities.
Thank you so much. And I'll note that Commissioner Knight has joined us, so I will hand over all of the facilitation to him. Thank you.
Wait a minute now. Hey, hello, how y'all doing? How y'all doing? Sorry, I had technical difficulties. I want to thank Tony and Booby for joining us. Like, this is a real important conversation that we should have, and how to navigate this and how to get back to community policing. There's so much tension in these communities that it doesn't just come from the people in the community. It comes from, the police going to the communities, and how much tension is being on from ongoing beefs, which we're not seeing, and I'm not saying, I'm not I'm trying to be like moderate on this and modest with this conversation about how police are really going into these communities and, creating so much tension um, in the community with people that live in the community. And again, like Tony said, gentrification plays a major role because, people, that haven't lived in these communities doesn't really understand the culture of how these communities are. And so it's a different playing field and what it looks like, just kind of the scope of it and what it looks like. So I, I I just wanted to start there, and I don't know if Booby came on yet. I know they was introduced, but I don't know if Booby came on yet, so we can kind of let Charles King. I'm sorry, but that's his nickname to us, Charles King. So we're gonna let Charles come on and share his insight on what we're discussing tonight.
Well, it's a two-parted question. We're talking about community policing, about violence. Economics is most definitely important and imperative, because if we want to tell somebody to stop being violent or to stop engaging in violent activities or habits that create violence, we have to have an opportunity to present them. I just had a situation like that where I had, and Tony knows about this as well. We've talked about this recently. I had two guys that was basically from opposite neighborhoods I had guys who was from opposite neighborhoods who I actually got jobs, and now they work together. The center of that goal was economics, right? They're both sitting at the same table with their co-workers now because of economic opportunity. I think that, as they said, gentrification has changed the model of how DC look, especially in an urban setting, or if we were define it in the lower class communities, because we have a lot of people that are actually going into communities, being housed in other communities that they're originally from. If you take a guy from, say, Sursum Quarters, which just was recently closed down and they're demolishing it right now, right? And you move him to, let's just say, a place like Benning Park, they had a problem, but his family don't have the option or the opportunity to go somewhere. To go somewhere else, they have to go wherever their voucher may take them. So that's one issue. The issue of policing, I believe that we got to be more proactive with the police. The police got to be more proactive. We do have community policing, but we have bad community policing. That's where the problem comes at. The outrage is because of the activities of some of these police that engage some of the people from the communities, something happening. So when something does happen, look at that, and it's the reputation of the police officer. We have to have these police understand that they are visiting these communities and these people live here. And it's no different than a community anywhere. We go to Wisconsin Avenue, right? The police tactics aren't the same. How is it we can be in the same city, dealing with the same police department in different jurisdictions, but get different results from the police? It's because it's a preconceived notion, and I believe that they're prejudging some of the people in the communities that they're going into to work based upon whatever their preconceived opinions is. So I think if we become more pro with the situation, when something does happen, we can have a better reply from the community when something does happen, because the community already has relationship with the police department. A lot of times the police department shows up after the fact of a situation, or they're engaged with a situation that enrages the community. And what about the positive things, right? It's a lot of things that aren't being done in the communities that the police can get out there and do, right? And I'm not just going to blame it all on the police. I got to also elaborate on some of the people in the community that are disrespectful, that are negative, and everything else that come with that. I'm not one-sided. I'm going to be completely objective. I do recognize that, see the disrespect that does happen. You know, it's recorded, it's posted online and things of that nature. So it has to be a balance. And I think the balance has to be proactivity, and it also has to be a type of respect that's gained on both ends.
How big a part do the drugs play as a major contributor to violence in our communities?
If you ask me my opinion, my opinion, I don't use drugs, but if I had to make an assumption, I would say it plays a major part. I mean, right now we're in a day and time where the drugs that are being used, we've never seen being used in our communities before. You know, it isn't like when I was growing up. You know, and when you talk about drugs, right? Let's look at the economic situation of the marijuana dispensary in Washington, D.C. You have people been going to jail for years and years and years here. And once the city becomes gentrified, you can sell legal marijuana. So, I mean, that could be enraging to a person too, who's sitting here with a felony for a drug offense, say marijuana per se. But now I can't even participate in the market because I'm a felon. But if you ask my opinion, I do believe that drugs play a major part. And when I say drugs, I speak of everything from alcohol to any other type of drug that you can name.
And I ask a few questions. Y'all both, thank y'all all for being here. There are a couple of things that y'all started talking about, and I want to dive a little bit further to try to pull out some solutions and address some the root issues that y'all identify, which I really appreciate. One is around gentrification. And so curious to know if you've seen any solutions that have worked and dealing with conflict that arises from putting people in places that they're not from, or where beefs might already exist, and without doing that community building work. And so curious if there's any solutions y'all have seen that have worked, even if it's at a very micro level, or if there's any thought y'all have given around, we could make recommendations that, the DC Housing Authority or DCHD could enforce around vouchers and both local supplement tenant-based or project-based, in terms of just ensuring that people have more options in where they're choosing to live. So that's my first question, and I'll pause there. For anyone.
No, I jump in, I guess, on that one. I think in terms of that process, and assuming that I think DC Housing Authority would be an agency that you could talk to about this. Obviously, everybody moving around not necessarily in public housing, but if they are, I think could be an important built-in step that, DC is sort of infamous for being sort of incredibly siloed. So just having a conversation around what potential communities that community is having any kind of rivalries or known disputes with, right? So just moving into that, and even because sometimes the residents may not be forthcoming with that kind of information out of fear that they may lose their voucher, right? But that, DCHA can do their due diligence and conversations with the violence interruption infrastructure, with MPD or what have you, to sort of have these conversations so that when they're placing people somewhere or moving folks to a different area, that they have an awareness of where they may be unsafe, right? I think that's a step. I think having people on the ground have access to resources, I think is going to be the necessary solution across the board, though. And what resources, right? I think obviously when we start talking about access to training and education programming, and or employment, those kind of things cannot no longer be an afterthought in these processes. The whole goal in my mind, right, again, back to my opening statements, was we have to think about how do we stabilize particularly adults in the community, right? There's a lot of programming out here for youth, but it doesn't hit because it's instability around them, right? So I think, being hyper-focused on the adults in the community, and that's starting at 18, obviously, but in linkages to the incredible job market that's here. And even if they're not ready, then training modalities that'll get them ready. But a lot of those people have barriers, particularly being justice involved. So again, this is something, all of these, none of this stuff is an island. So when we look at barriers to men and women that have been, involved with the criminal justice system. And if I may, before I end, the question about drugs that, I think that's important. Again, another shift, I think, in terms of when we grew up in the 80s and in the 90s and the early 2000s, is that we see more of the individuals involved in violence, not necessarily just selling drugs or if they're selling drugs at all, but to Booby's, how he articulate about using the usage of drugs. And I think the trauma that is impacting these communities and this generation has really, had them in a different mindset of drug usage. And I don't even think that the treatment apparatus has really morphed to really deal with the quote unquote addict that we see today. But working with young people, working with young adults, that the use of whether it's synthetic drugs or regular marijuana or opioids, alcohol, so on and so forth, and sometimes all of those things at the same time really is playing a part in people's decision making. So that I think drugs in the standpoint often in this city has been talked about people resulting in violence over disputes over drugs. I think that still happens to a certain degree, but in today's world, it's the usage of drugs that I think is what we're dealing with, and really that's rooted in people inability to cope with the trauma that they are experiencing and have experienced in this city, whether it's in their community or due to systemic violence against them, and obviously violence sometimes it's coming from in a direction from the police department.
Thank you. Can I ask my second question? I don't want to take up too much space, but Tony already started going in that direction. My second question was around the different types of conflicts that we're seeing. So the two that stood out to me, one of you all shared that the majority of conflict we're seeing is actually interpersonal violence. And then this whole piece around drugs, but not necessarily a drug dispute, but really the underlining mental health and trauma that people aren't able to have, we don't have the resources to address. I know from my work in a previous life that in DC, when we're talking about, whether we're talking about substance abuse or we're talking about mental health, that about 80% of folks who identify any of those have dual diagnosis, meaning they both have a substance abuse disorder as well as either a diagnosable or undiagnosed mental health issue. And so with that, curious to know, again, what have been some things that you actually feel support and work well in addressing interpersonal violence or in addressing or de-escalating mental health episodes. And this might be leading, so feel free to address this however you want. Do you think that the police are equipped to deal with those two very specific types of conflicts?
As far as mental health, I've dealt with quite a few mental health cases, especially dealing with the youth. There's a couple of components to that, especially dealing with mental health. Some of the services aren't available to some of these youth, maybe lack of insurance, lack of a parent to actually get them the proper treatment that they need at their age. I think that dealing with the mental health and dealing with the drug, I believe that sometimes the drug usage is self-medication because of the mental health. We try to escape the reality of what they're dealing with. So it's kind of like hand in hand to a degree. I think that some of the best methods that I have seen is actually getting a person to, if they have an issue, and then trying to help them. Communication is key. If we can't get you to identify with us what's going on with you, then we can't even address the issue, because we can assume whatever we want. But if we're assuming we're misdiagnosing and triaging the wrong issues, then we don't know what we're dealing with. Do I think that the police are equipped to handle it? I don't think, and I don't know the police protocol, or I don't know the police training, but I don't know if they even have training in their training for mental health issues. or for someone maybe hallucinating on a drug or something. As Tony said, it's more of the drug usage and that of the economics from drugs. This causing a lot of the thing, you know, that I've personally seen throughout my time working I'm doing. So I think that if the police have that, I think the police need to have some type of training in that field, or just even be put on notice that when you're going to a call, this could be a mental health issue, or this could possibly be someone that's dealing with a drug issue. So don't approach it as if that person is being intentionally aggressive when that person isn't even in their right state of mind. I think the decisions that can be exercised with the police when they approach people, especially when they're going where we know that drug usage is high and prevalent. You know, it's recognized, and we all recognize it at some point. But you know, like Tony was saying, I think that that's most definitely one of the things, and that's what I was kind of like speaking on initially when I didn't completely articulate it, but he came behind me and articulated when I spoke on the drug usage to the gentleman's question. I was really speaking about when we're speaking about how does drugs affect the community. I believe that the drug usage now is like running rampant, right? Because as he said, we're synthetic drugs. Some of the stuff I've never heard of before. So how do I even know how a person will react when they're on these drugs? So I hope that I answered your question to the best of my ability, and I'm trying to remember your complete question.
I want to follow up on what he just said. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, I actually was going to say you just joined us,
Yes.
and you could give a quick introduction of yourself. So you were right on time.
How everybody doing? My name's Wayne Cunningham. On the streets, they call me Cousin Wayne. I work at the Warren's office. I'm a violence interrupter. I appreciate y'all inviting me tonight. I just want to follow up what he just said. When I'm dealing with the youth in the streets, the worst thing you could tell a kid is mental health. We're gonna sign you up for mental health. Just that word, mental health, you make the kids say, "There's nothing wrong with me." I think that we need to try to focus on trying to make it these youth understand that it's okay to talk about what you're going through, the stuff that you're saying. I just think the word mental chases them away. So, and we don't. I think we need to use like videos and use that social media to make kids understand it's okay. 'Cause remember, back in the day, moms tell you don't tell nobody nothing that goes on in the house. And I think even though the moms don't tell these kids that now, for some reason they don't want to tell you nothing. So when you talking about some mental health, they know they smoking, they know they doing a whole lot of stuff, but we got to learn how to approach them better. And as far as the police approaching them with the mental health, they're gonna look at that as, oh, I know you ain't trying to talk to me about no mental health problems. So I think that that's that first question that she just asked. We got to come up with a better idea how to say that you need some help instead of saying that word mental health. You would think that I'm crazy when you say that.
Yeah, that's real. I appreciate that. The other part, and y'all did answer my question. The other part was around someone named interpersonal violence of being the root of a lot of conflict. And so curious to know what interventions you have found to work between interpersonal violence.
Yeah. I would say on the interpersonal violence, obviously it's about having people, in those communities that build those relationships that they can sort of intercede, right? First of all, they can be present or be close enough to the issues that when these things come about, that they can be alerted and can react. And I'm really speaking in the sense of like violence interrupters. But then those interrupters have to be tied to additional resources. So whether it's wellness and behavioral health supports, whether it's the things I talked about with training and employment, whether it's about supports for housing or treatment, all of the things that one would need to intervene or diffuse certain situations, right? When you look at the budgets for the violence interrupters or those organizations versus the budgets for other things, right? They're not even comparable, right? So, but because the one thing about the violence interrupters or being a violent interrupter or outreach work or whatever you want to call it, when I was a roving leader, you can build all the relationships you want. People can trust you. People can respect you. But when you can't change their condition, right? When you can't, be there when they need, like, to do everything that's necessary to really diffuse the situation, it puts you in a rough spot. And so, we probably have no idea. There's no way to really measure the real impact that these violence interrupters are having, how many lives they're saving. We only hear about it in terms when somebody loses their life, right? And so and anyway, just to sort of crystallize my point, access to resources in all of the target areas that we know, and really have those that have trust in the community and buy-in in the community to really be the liaison. And on the police, even on the police side, like my mother's schizophrenic, right? I've been dealing with that my whole life, basically, since my father went to jail, which when I was 9. And I've seen, and I've been in a situation with my grandmother at the time when she was alive, and even we had to call the police on my mom, right? And I've seen the response, get better, right, over the years, or if you say it on the phone, then they'll try to send out the DBH team, or at least alert the responding officer that this may be a mental health situation. What's problematic, though, is when, say, if it's not such a personal call, right, when it's not somebody who knows that individual. And I think so at a baseline, though, our police departments have to understand how to just engage people in general, right? And be able to be trained to make an assessment of what's going on in those moments. And I'm not saying that training or something similar has not happened, but I just think it needs to continue to happen, and it may need to be something developed where systematically there's a part of the police force, or a sister agency that can be dispatched to sort of address these mental health things, maybe a trauma team, maybe a trauma component that goes to communities that we know are dealing with economic issues and issues of violence. Like, I really feel like we have to broaden our scope on what this stuff could and should look like. But as I land this plane, again, sorry to be long-winded, but this thing is like, for real, I want everybody here to understand how these dots have to be connected, right? These things are not sort of isolated. And as long as people continue to be poor, right, and we're going to continue to deal with violence on this level, there's no way that we have 167 murders in this city in a time when or even like last year pre-COVID, if we want to, COVID is a part of it this year too, but if we want to look last year, in 20 murders being up, the highest murders we had in the decade, in being 90-something% African American, and probably most of those people from DC, when we have so much economic success and progression otherwise. And every other group in this city, people from all over the world move here to chase their dreams, and people born here feel like they're living in a nightmare. Like, it really has to be, it's deeper than just what the police are doing. You know what I'm saying? Like, we got to really look at every layer to be able to support and empower these communities.
Could someone give me an example, a real life example of what a violence interrupter does?
I can give you a real life example. Or yeah. Would you like to speak, Wayne, or you want me to speak? I'll speak. Doing a violence interruption work, a real life example would possibly be, not even possibly, which would be, because I have Tony on the line, and Tony can vouch for this. By me just being a member of the community, I had the opportunity to hear about an incident that was going on between two gentlemen, right? It was a very incident. It was to the point that lives could have been lost. Due to me hearing about it, and I had a relationship with both parties, I intercepted one party and went and met with Tony and another gentleman, and we sat down and spoke to the first young man. We got kind of the details of the situation. I had the opportunity to reach out to the second young man who was involved with the situation. Set him down, got his take on it. After I heard everybody out, I gave them my interpretation of what was going on and my opinion about the situation, because it was an interpersonal situation where these men had an issue, but at the end of the day, they knew each other. Their families knew each other in some capacity. Let's just say they're from the same community, right? So I had to, articulate to them, listen, going to make sense at the end. Like the end result of this is going to be someone's going to be in prison, someone might be in the cemetery, but at the end of the day, y'all families all know each other. And I do through my mediation with those gentlemen and with the help of Tony and another gentleman that I had come in and assist me I actually reached out to Tony and the other gentleman for resources. And this is where resources is important, because sometimes you need those resources right then and now on board. They're willing to work with you right then and there, but sometimes it's the red tape when you can't get those resources, right? So when I say that I had the gentleman and they wind up coming to an amicable agreement that they was gonna leave it alone. And it hasn't been a problem, but it was just based on the communication. If I had not stepped in, who knows what would have went.
Right.
That's what
Thank you.
That measure the impact of a violence interrupter.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, and thank you all so much for coming here tonight and speaking with us. It's incredibly helpful. The question I had is, Mr. Lewis, when you started talking, and I hear this whenever I think we talk about DC violence in DC, one of the first things I always hear people say is, the important thing to understand about DC is that it's crew violence. What makes it different is that it's crew violence. It'd be helpful to me to understand, what is it about that makes it different in terms of like the significance of that? What is it about that we need to think about in terms of coming up with solutions that this is crew violence? And when you say interpersonal conflict is what's undergirding a lot of the violence, do you mean something different than crew violence, or do you say those two things to mean the same thing?
No, they're different. So historically, in DC, you saw crew violence, meaning a particular neighborhood has a rivalry or beef with another neighborhood, right? Today that still exists, and I think also that distinction is often made about DC as it relates to gang violence, right? We don't have gangs, so typically people just want to make it clear that we have crews and not gangs, meaning that we're unlike other places, other major cities across the country in that regard. And also with crew violence, meaning also you typically have people that sort of operate in an individualistic way. And so with this interpersonal violence, we're starting to see violence even within the same crew. So it's not, I'm from Hanover Place and we beefing with Certain Quarter, but now in today's world, the Hanover Place guys are beefing with each other, right? And so those are the two sort of dynamics that is going on within our communities today. You wouldn't see that as much in times past. You wouldn't see sort of the rivalries within the same crew. So those would be the how I would address that.
Well, what's the difference between a crew and a gang, or are they just pretty much?
Well, in a crew, there's no color. They don't jump you in. There's no real hierarchies even sometimes. It's just a group of people that typically grew up in the same neighborhood. They're more loosely connected than a gang. As it relates to, if you look at, the Bloods, the Crips, Gangster Disciples, Vice Lords, MS-13, those things have hierarchy and bylaws and customs that they follow. A crew here in DC is really, again, about people that grew up in the same neighborhood or people that congregate in the same neighborhood. And those crews can be, the block over can be a completely different crew.
So I wonder, because that's actually a really rich piece of information, and kind of understanding how incidences of violence don't just happen, but how they also could potentially move across neighborhoods and wards. Because I feel like we talk a lot about on this commission, and just generally when we talk about policing, we focus on things happening in Ward 7 and 8 or whatever. And I'm curious, considering what you just described in terms of how crews operate, how should responses be designed, right? Like, should it be designed based upon neighborhood, right? Like you have sort of a concentration of programs or resources that are invested in a particular neighborhood, a particular block, or should it be structured in a different type of way? to really reach
like-
people that you're talking about?
I like to answer that.
Yeah.
Like you said, gangs are structured. Like you said, everything is structured with a gang. A crew is, like you said, everybody just hang together and we see them, we're going to fight them. But I think the only way we can solve the problem is you need more interrupters. If my neighborhood, like you said, handover and search and quarter, you can't work with handover if you don't work with search and quarters. You got to know what neighborhoods they beefing with. So if I know that handover has a problem with search and quarters and they might have a problem with Detroit Park, we need 3 or 6 interrupters and 2 in each area to work with them youth or whoever we working with. So when the violence do happen, we already got the relationship. We already know what happened. If somebody come through handover shooting, we know most likely is them 2 neighborhoods. So we got to be able to get on the phone with another interrupter and say, hey, something just happened. Can you go outside or go around there and check and see what's going on? Because something just happened around here. But the problem is we don't have enough, like you said, it's not enough money in the city to be able to put some violence interrupters in every neighborhood that we know that's beefing. And some neighborhoods got about 8 neighborhoods that want to fight them or shoot at them. But if you want to solve the problem or slow it down, you got to get people working in all them communities. And that's what it is. We was working on one side of the fence, and across the other fence, we not doing nothing. But you're harassing, not you, people are getting harassed in their community after the shooting. And they ain't the ones that was they was the ones shot at. So why is the people coming and harassing them? They need to be going after the ones that did it, and they don't know who did it. So that's the problem right there.
Can I ask who you mean when you say the people are harassing people who didn't do it?
Well, I say the police. I say the police. If somebody just came around handover and shot the place up, the police would come around handover and then make it seem like y'all the ones started or y'all the ones that was doing the shooting. And they know the shooter was in the car that took off. They know the shooter not around there, but then they start checking the people that's on the block, looking all under the cars and stuff. And the people finished up, why is y'all coming now after my buddy got shot? Y'all coming harassing us, and y'all know the people that did it. Y'all got the cameras. Y'all need to be chasing after them. So the people feel as though they be harassed after the fact that they ain't got nothing to do with it. What just happened.
So do you think that
Thank
can
you.
you like community distrust in these neighborhoods, like how people feel about the police?
Yeah, absolutely it does.
Yeah, most definitely. Because like after the fact, with the elaborate on what Mr. Cunningham is saying is you have police come into these communities with heavy police tactics after the shooting. Of course, they want to come into the community, try to figure out what's going on. They call, it's a tactic to try to make the community more safer, as they may see. But the residents of the community who are there feeling like, hey, you coming around here basically jumping on us, and we're the victims, right? Well, why are you jumping on us? We're the victims. Son was shot, or my brother was shot. Now you come around here, and we got to deal with you as basically you victimizing us to a degree. So I think if that might articulate a little bit more onto what Mr. Cunningham was just saying when he was speaking. I think that that's what he's speaking of, and I can personally attest to that. Coming from those communities, being in those communities, after an incident usually happens, there's always heavy police presence happens after that, right? And people saying to themselves, okay, you're around here now, but some of the people in the community, this, regular citizens saying, you should have been around here before, and now y'all here and y'all making us feel like we're under siege to a degree.
From your experience, though, when people say, why are you here? Because we're victims, will they tell the police who the wrongdoers are? Or they, a lot of the police complain that there's such distrust in the communities that they won't tell them who did it.
Well, they won't tell them. If you're asking me that question,
yeah.
How do you tell a police something that's who's been here probably you had a problem with for years, right? Who's been out here mistreating you, disrespecting you. That's what I was talking about earlier when I was saying being proactive in the community instead of right? And so, I mean, you do have people to cooperate with the police. Every community has 100% of anything, right? Maybe the police isn't getting the information that they want to people come forward with certain things in just about every community in this city. It's humanly impossible that you go to any community in this city and you just don't get no information. I don't believe that. You know, they may get the information, they might don't get the information they're seeking. But yeah, I believe that people do cooperate with the police because police will come back around and say, we got a lead. The lead had to come from somewhere, right?
And if I could add to that, I think it's important that you know, I think all communities want public safety. I think where we drop the ball at though is that we look at a certain group of people as a risk to public safety versus our infrastructure working to try to keep every member of the community safe, right? And so that's a different perspective. We should be attacking public safety by looking at everybody in the community and saying it's the role of law enforcement to keep everybody safe, not to keep some people safe from this particular group of people. And I think we need a paradigm shift as it relates to that. So when we talk about what can we do, you know, when we go into these communities, community policing is not just simply, you know, smiling at residents. That's a part of it. But if your role in those communities you need to be there a lot. You need to be there constantly and there to protect the community and help the community. I think from that standpoint, a lot of these relationships would be different, you know, and I'm speaking that from growing up, you know, and I write a lot about this in my book as it relates to this one relationship, me and this particular officer who just because I lived in my community, he already had, you know, decided who I was and what I was. Right? I'm the same guy talking to you now when I was 16, 17, and all the legal search rob me, take my money, all the things that happen. And I'm using that as an example of, in a lot of cases, this is what happens, right? And so to think that people, it's not just about, the police department. I hear that when they say that people don't, you know, get them information, this, that, and the third. And to Mr. Knight's point, people do share information with the police and people want their communities to be safe. But I think the deeper level is, first of all, this isn't even, right? The police department has a higher standard, right? They're the professionals. They took an oath to serve and protect. And, you know, they have to value the people in these communities, right? I think that's where it comes. So if residents or citizens feel like they're valued and they're treated with respect, I think that same thing would be extended. I've seen that happen, but you just have too many police officers who deem people threats to the community, and that's all that person, he or she, can be in the mind of that officer, versus that officer thinking about what can they do to help change or shift that individual's decision making, right? And I think anybody from a community like the ones that Mr. Cunningham and Mr. King and Mr. Knight come from, you do understand accountability is on individuals. It's people that understand the police have a job to do, right? Yeah. But it's also about the way that they go about that, and how they make people feel when they're doing their job.
Do you see a difference between the treatment from Black officers as being different from white officers?
Not necessarily.
No, I don't see nothing different about
Not
that.
necessarily.
I
mean, in this town,
I have in some occasions.
I've seen good white officers.
I've seen good white. I've seen, and that's not to say that the Blacks treat me better than the whites or the whites treat me better than the Blacks, but I have seen it. You feel what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I have seen it where people have came into these communities who are not from here, right, and don't have an understanding about what they are actually dealing with. So, and that's of both ethnicities, whether you're talking Black, white, Chinese, or whatever, right? And they don't have an understanding of what they're dealing with because they're coming from a different demographic, a different paradigm, and a different place than what they're encountering here. Like, this is a unique place. You know, not to say DC is a mecca for something, but like, as y'all spoke about the gangs and crews, you got people who grew up in other places, who are moving here, who come from atmospheres where gangs was at. So they're coming at us as of like on some gang stuff, and it's not even that type of situation. You know, you got people pulling up asking you to keep it moving or get off of this street. I've been sitting on this street for 30 years. This is a street I was born and raised on.
I have a
You know, so like saying that because they don't equate that. Go ahead, Wayne. I'm finished.
I have a
Yep. Have a
the,
quick.
the problem that I have with the officers sometimes is they don't know how to, when another officer doing overboard, they want us to tell your buddy to go ahead, man. He doing too much. Go ahead. But why they don't tell each other that?
Yeah.
What's wrong with you? What's wrong checking your partner and say, hey, all right, let it go, because you're doing too much. That's why if you look at a lot of the killings and stuff that the police are involved with, the other person that's with him, he know that's wrong, and he going right down with him because he don't check his buddy and saying that you're doing something wrong. He know you're going overboard, and that's what I have a problem with. They're not doing.
So I see
Commissioner Hill.
a question, and just for others, if you want to get in a question, just so I make sure I see, if you want to put up your hand and participants, then I can track it. But I think Commissioner Bob, you had a question.
Yes, it would be great if we could package the comments that some of the comments that Commissioner Lewis made earlier, just previously, with the more powerful, what I think is the more powerful and much broader set of work. And I don't know if we have the time to do it. Mr. King brought up something that is really, I think really powerful, and that is, and I want to quote him, and I hope he doesn't mind me quoting him. He said, we have to change the model on how the community works. That's huge. And I'm not sure how to make that happen or how to think that it's something that I personally want to think through. But I thought that was a very powerful statement in terms of how do we then construct policies, practices, procedures in terms of how to make the community, change the model of how the community works. That, to me, is a very powerful statement.
Mr. Cunningham,
Oops.
I would like to follow up what he just said. How do you change it? I think they need to work with the VIs on training them of what we see and what we go through out there. Maybe they'll understand. Remember, he said there's a lot of officers coming from other places and they looking at us as gangs. They understand the crew thing. Won't they talk to us VIs and sit down and basically train them on what we see on a regular? Maybe they understand the youth a little bit better.
Yeah, I was going to add to that, or sort of kind of, I thought it was changing the community's mindset has to do with so much, including what Dwayne just said, and sort of all the things we've been talking about, education, housing, everything. But I really like the way that Tony put it. If people in police, if instead of treating people as threats, they treated them as people to be protected and thought about what they could do to shift the person's decision making. Like, to me, that shows so much understanding of how today's perpetrator of violence is tomorrow's victim of violence, and we need to make everyone feel protected. And I wanted to ask you, because to me that sounds like
She froze.
She froze.
She froze for me. Did she freeze her?
She froze.
Okay.
She froze.
Okay, hopefully she'll come back. But while we wait on that.
Yeah, Christy froze, but at some point, Commissioner Hill, I'd really like to revisit at some point during the course of our work, this whole statement around changing the model of how the community works and dig deeper into that.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think that actually both your comments, Commissioner Bob, and I think, Christy, you're back. You froze up. But I was going to say, I think the combination of where I think Christy was going with her comments before she froze really is at the core of the work. So I'll let you finish.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Whenever anyone uses the microwave in my house, things freeze up. So meal times are a disaster around Zoom. But so I just wanted to, I was wondering, I like the way that you said to Mr. Lewis, if police treated people as people to be protected and thought about what they could do to shift the person's decision making. Because when I think about violence interrupters, I think about I think that's what they do, right? You're trying to like get in there and like help people make different, better decisions. And you talked a little bit, you've all talked a little bit about how you do that through knowing people and sort of just persuading them and through resources. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are very concretely about what the city can do, what we can do, what recommendations you would make to help those violence interruption efforts and outreach efforts be more effective. You said some of them, but I want to make sure we don't miss anything in terms of how we would make those as effective as possible in the district.
I would say expand them, obviously, you know, so grow the funding for violence interruption in our city, link those entities or those individuals with resources that can be expedient and readily available around wellness and behavioral health / trauma, employment, training, education, housing, and substance abuse. Those are the things I think that would be a great start to, and then even in terms of cohesion, right? Do those individuals with all of those, and I'm not, this is just a suggestion, but like with all of those positions be community-based or would they fall under one agency or whatever the case may be, but it needs to be cohesion even amongst those violence interrupters or those groups, right? It needs to be data sharing. I would personally love to see a social service database in the city where if an individual is receiving services from whether it's community-based or government agencies, that those other entities interacting with that individual could see that, right? That they could, I know it's HIPAA laws and things of that nature, but if it's like non-medical stuff, whatever could be shared, I think should be, because the other part of it, we have to de-silo. There's a lot of amazing work going on in this city. And sometimes you'll find yourself in this work, working with someone, Wayne will be working with the same guy, and then Booby's working with the same guy, but we didn't know, right? We didn't know until sometimes, I don't want to say it's too late, but just like, oh, you know him? Yeah, I know him. I work with him. He in my program too. So I think it's important that we de-silo and communicate and share data if we really want to give the best shot at interrupting violence from a VI standpoint. Obviously, there needs to be fidelity in that work. There needs to be, violence interruption and law enforcement are not one and the same, right? Those two things are parallel in some ways, but they don't work together in terms of, I think that's an important point. I hope everybody understands, but they can coordinate in order to bring safety to communities, right? So I think, again, that data sharing on that level wouldn't be, hey, this guy is known to be a shooter. It's not what that's about from a violence interruption standpoint, even if MPD is aware of somebody's history. But what needs to happen is that MPD can come to violence interrupters or violence interruption infrastructure for training and guidance around better ways to interact with the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's actually you said something that really struck me that I think is worth reiterating, is that we can't fall into the assumption that violence interruption or reduction equates to policing. It's not one and the same. And thinking about them as these two very separate frameworks, right? When we're talking about reducing violence and the role of violence interrupters versus the role of law enforcement, that there is a distinction. And I think that for me, at least, and perhaps I'm trying to, draw blood from a turnip here, but I think it gets to what I think Commissioner Bob and both Christy were talking about, and thinking about this more holistically in terms of building up communities and also providing very intentional resources to those individuals who we know are most likely to be engaged in violence and also be, cross-victimized, which Christy has brought up, in several different instances, is that we're talking about the same people, right? And this idea of
that's real.
is real.
That's a heck of a point. I mean, I think that's why I was sorry to interrupt, but that's why I was just really saying about the importance of our vantage point of how we look at these individuals, right? They're not different, right? The victim and quote unquote victim and the quote unquote perpetrator. Like, and Wayne can speak to this program. We run pathways over at DeJuan's office. You know what I mean? These are the same people who commit victim crimes have been victims of violent crime. But a lot of times the people in our community, we're never seen as victims. And that's part of the problem. And to just I want to make a point about to Commissioner Bob in terms of like back when they, when he was the city administrator, the Parks and Rec had a program called the Youth Ambassadors that morphed into the Junior Roving Leader program.
Right.
Like I was a part of that program. You understand? Like that program was getting the people that were the closest to the problem to turn and be violence interrupters, right? And that program really, introduced me to my purpose in life, right? Saved my life for real, to be honest with you. And I'm not saying that because Mr. Bob here, I've shared that, before, but since you're here, I'm just letting you know that. But those are the kind of programs that are needed. And we really need to be looking again to not just people that like, in their 30s, 40s, but like a lot of these younger guys that's closer to the problem. If we can grab them and give them jobs and careers, and they could get their purpose too, and they're the closest to the problem. These years of premature death in this city and mass incarceration has really changed how young people see especially men, see older men. A lot of them didn't even grow up with older men. So their ability to respect the OG or the big homie is a different thing. Their peers are the ones they look up to. And so we need to do a better job at empowering them and turning them into the interrupters. Again, they the closest to the problem. So I feel like that's a part of it as well. And one thing you're not combating that the city was combating when I came along, was the streets. I mean, it was a lot of money in the street when I was coming up. You know what I'm saying? So it was a big choice to get a job. It was like nobody had a job. But in today's world, a lot of times, if we can get them something tangible, something they can see some light and some hope, we really can turn the corner. You know what I'm saying? They don't want that. Like they really can turn the corner.
Especially resources. Speaking on that of giving them something. If you look at the youth in the city, other than the youth summer program, they really don't give a youth no options, right? A lot of the teenage youth in these communities now have no options. They get options once they enter the juvenile justice system. They can get locked up and they can get the Jury M fund, they get finance for college, they get gift cards, they can get all the support, they get mental health support. But what about the youth that we got in the community that aren't getting in trouble?
Oh, that's a great point.
That is a huge
opportunity,
point.
right?
That is an
right.
point.
Like that's and it's something that I've seen and it's something that I've dealt with personally. I try to help through my organization outside of my own personal work of doing what I do for a living. That's why I started my nonprofit, trying to address helping people such as those youth to try to more resources if I got it. But you can get in trouble and you can get the world, right? But if you're not getting in trouble, what about the youth that's in the neighborhood that hasn't gotten in trouble, right? He has an opportunity, but he doesn't have the resources to go and do something because he's not in trouble. So I think that's something else that really need to be addressed.
Let me say something.
When you start talking opportunities, because the earlier we catch them, the better the chance is that we'll have with them not being a part of the problem and knowing probably some of the people that are part of the problem. Because I know guys that when I was growing up and I was running the streets, despite them not running the streets, I still respected them. I had friends that was regular civilians, went off to college, not a lot, but a few. And that's something that really need to be looked into also.
I want to say something what he just said, and that's so true what he said about a young man told me, he said, Cousin Wayne, what I gotta go shoot somebody for me to be able to go on a trip with y'all? Like he was saying that as a joke, but I know he really felt some type of way because he wasn't a kid that was getting locked up or getting in trouble. He said that I know he really meant what he said. Like, what I got to get in trouble to be able to be a part of the program.
So
what you all are saying is that the kids who are in trouble have a greater resources available to them than the kids on the street. I think that's what I heard, right?
Wow.
No, you're right. That's what's going on.
Wow.
I never thought of that.
And then my final question is, have you all been, and maybe we have to raise this with, just ask the question with the police, but much of what you all have said today, is that when the police, at the police academy, are you all sometimes invited or not invited to?
No, Mr. Bob, and I'm gonna listen. I'm not a person to and I say this all deference and humility. I'm not a person to like do no plugs or nothing. But I've actually introduced this or at least recommended this, right? There has to be better cultural competency training, and I've even talked about every officer getting a copy of my book Slugg, because I mean honestly it provides a real layout not only of life in an urban environment, but specifically what life is like in the communities that they're going to be policing and the humanity that exists in the places that they are policing. I had an opportunity myself, Eric Weaver, I think it was Ron Moten was with us. We had an opportunity to go and have a conversation with the gun squad before. But all of this stuff is coming sort of like after the fact. We need to do, like you said, the academy where people are coming in, they can get a real baseline, and get them ready before they even come in contact with our residents. You know what I'm saying? We really need to start to be a part of that process. And again, it needs to be money and resources put forth to prepare.
Most definitely some type of contractual structure where you have someone that come in and talk to each, basically say cohort or whatever, because just going to speak to one cohort isn't going to be, sufficient enough for everyone comes through there. So, the same way they go through all the other trainings and speak with people about stuff, about how you should handle this situation, how you should handle that situation. A person like Tony or Wayne or myself come in there and have a conversation with them, and they can ask questions before they even get into the community. So when they see it, they can recognize it. Because if you don't have that, it's like sending someone to take a awareness test for driving, but they never had the awareness manual, right? They just in there just guessing, and of course, if you're guessing 9 times out of 10, you're going to fail.
I would like to find out why is it that they changed when they changed the beat. They used to have one officer that knows everybody in the community. It seemed like every day you got somebody new coming around there, and they got a different way of looking. Like you said, they need the training, so they won't be looking at everybody different, like with an attitude or think I got a grit to let these young boys know I ain't playing with them. But if you got the same one on the regular, I'd be like, oh, that's Officer Buck. Like it's Officer Buck. And everybody know him because he's always around, and they know he's a police, and they know if they do something wrong, he gonna lock them up. But he gonna give you chance after chance. He gonna talk to you. But you don't get to do that.
That's how it used to be. That's how it used to be, Wayne, when we was coming up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I think what we gotta understand too, y'all, on this side, like now, depending on what neighborhood you're talking about too, I mean, the likelihood of that is becoming slimmer and slimmer. And I think again with the changing of the resident is also playing a part in that. I mean, you got communities, particularly west of the river, that you got sort of historic residents, and then you got the new residents, right? And so the new residents are, in a lot of ways, calling the police to come and remedy these strangers that I don't know that's standing in front of my house or standing on my block. And those same guys are like, I've been here all my life.
Yeah. I'm laughing.
You know what I'm saying?
I had that happen to me. I personally had that happen to me when me and one of my friends came back to the community, and we were sitting on this front aunt living on the street for 40 years. The police pulled up and said, "Hey, we got a call. Do y'all live around here?"
Yeah,
I don't have that problem now because we still frequent the same house as of today. Now she's been there maybe 45 years, right? But the community doesn't look at us like that now. But just that instant, that day, we looked at each other like, wow, right? And just imagine for the people who aren't like me, right? Who don't have a calm head, who isn't objective, who don't know how to say, hold up, yeah, we do know I live here. Because some people might take that as offense, right? Y'all calling the police on me, I've been around here, y'all, because we know that it's somebody in the community who called the police on me that wasn't here, but don't know me, because the people from the community know us, right? Like I said, it's family been on the street for 40 years, but that's why I had to laugh at that, because I personally encountered that, despite, and I don't even fit into what half of the young men getting the police called on them look like, right? So you can just imagine how many times maybe a younger gentleman who looks like he's like up to no good in someone's eyes, or I'm an older, middle-aged male, African American in the community. So just when you take that and equate that to, say, a 20-year-old with his pants hanging off, and he might have dreads in his head or whatever, the profiling starts. So this guy is being harassed for no reason. Because we wasn't breaking no laws. We hadn't done anything illegal, but someone called the police on us.
Yeah, and you seen as, I'm just saying, you seen as a pariah in your own community, imagine what that feels like, right? And again, that's what I'm saying. It's important that these officers have sort of that vantage point, that they understand what they're coming into. They understand the history of these communities, no matter where it is, because I feel like, you should engage the same way a police officer engages a neighbor in Palisades, should be the same way a police officer engages a neighbor in Congress Heights. It shouldn't be any different. If it's something that says after that the police has to go into a different, cool. But at the beginning, that person in Palisades is given, Palisades is seen as a human being, right? And we grew up in communities, we know what it feels like where you're dehumanized, what I'm saying, just based on your environment that you feel, or what could be going on in your community. You look, so can take that out of the minds of these officers, the better.
And having the police also understand that we got rights, that people got rights. A lot of times I watched it by me being very abreast with the law and the Constitution, a lot of violations of people's rights, especially the human right of give me your ID. I don't have to produce my ID. And that turns into something different because they feel like you're bucking their authority, right? But I have the right, not because you want my ID, right? That's not the law. The law says that I have the right to say no. I have that right as a citizen of the United States to tell you no, unless you articulate or prove to me that I've been identified or I fit the description of perpetrator of some form of fashion, then I don't understand why I'm being stopped and investigated, because you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights by illegally searching and seizing me. Once I give you my ID, I'm walk away. And this happens pretty common in suburban communities where a lot of the young men don't know their right. But as to speak on his, if you just say the Palisades neighborhood, they probably wouldn't do the same thing there. So also having the officers understand that just because you're a police, don't abuse your authority.
Absolutely. And I know we have just a few minutes left, but Commissioner Hampton, I've seen you nod and your head move, but I just wanted to make sure, did you have any questions or anything like that for the group?
Really and truthfully, I agree with all of them, because I've seen that kind of stuff. So when I was doing myself, I saw it, and I've seen it since I've retired, and it hasn't changed. And unless you dig down deep into the culture of law enforcement, you're not going to change it. Just that little surface stuff is not going to do it. I'm not even convinced that training gets it done, because see, training is topical, training is surface, and they sit in the room while you're talking to them and presenting to them, and they will nod their head and agree. But once they go back to the street, then they're going back to doing it the way they've been doing it, because it has worked for them. And the award system in the police department structure rewards that behavior. So as long as that behavior is awarded and they get something out of it on the outside, then they can go to the training room, sit up in there and nod their head and everything. but then go right back to participating. This is a discussion that's been going on. I was on the police department from 1970 to 1994, and this is 2000. So I've almost been gone as long as I served, and it was going on then, and it's still going on now. And I can't tell you, I can't even recall the amount of times some has been court ordered by a court. Some sensitivity, diversity training has been court ordered, and the department has been subjected to it. And some of it has been voluntary. Just like the training that a friend of mine, Bernie Demchek, does, where they take them, sit and talk to them for a half a day, and then take them over to the African American Museum, and then to run them through there so that they can see why all of this happens and why people feel the way they feel about the police. And if you can sit up there, and I mean, and they're not holding back on any of the training. Bernie does it with this woman who teaches out at Prince George's County Community College, and they are raw. What they're doing and what they're talking about is raw. And some of them same ones will sit up in that training, and then when they finish the training, they go back to the street. They go back to doing exactly what it was that they was doing. Because again, the award system doesn't change. You know, it's the thing like I had mentioned, and I'm gonna say this and then let it go. We've been talking about, we were in this session talking about stops. We know that the stops aren't productive. We know that the cost of them is far beyond any value that they could offer. And but they want to do it because they get, part of the reward system is that they get performance marks for stopping people. And so what do? They keep on stopping people because that's what they do. So if all of that hasn't changed in this 50 years, so that's just about how long my experiences are, then it's going to work. So I'm not convinced that it's training. I think that we have to do something about it. It's no question about that. But to send them to a classroom to sit down and talk to people, to expose them to some training when they're going to just put it in file 13 and then go back to doing it. See, what we need to do is have a real stringent system of it, and there has to be punishment. When you violate it, there has to be consequences, or we don't do it at all. But to suggest somehow or another that you can train this out of them, that hasn't worked in 50 years. So I'm at a departure with that part of it, but maybe there is something that we can do. But that hasn't worked because we've been doing it for a long time.
I knew you had something that you wanted to contribute. So I appreciate you adding that. I do want to be mindful of the time. I see, Chris, you have a question, but I also want to, if you had a quick question, and then
I just have 30 seconds of a friendly amendment to Ron's thing, which I agree with 100%. Training is not going to change it. Changing the incentive structure is going to change it. But if you think about training as education, and you can educate officers at all levels about the need to change the incentive structure so that we have more effective public safety, I think that's where the training could come in and the education could come in. But I agree with that 100%.
Thank you, Chris. That's exactly right. The education, you got to educate them out of it, but you can't train them out of it. So no, I agree with you 100%.
Thank you. Commissioner Knight, do you have anything to round out our conversation before we?
I think this is one great conversation of many, right? And what I want to do is I want to see if, we can have another meeting and then probably bring in Chief Newsom and some other, just to have the conversation with Charles, Tony, and Dwayne, the same conversation. How can we package this, right? And then see if we can, have this conversation of how can this work. I really want to know, because everything is, we have good ideas, we got good experience, we have so many layers of effective ways to make this happen that we have to have this conversation. And so how do we package this again, right? Invite some, some MPD hierarchy, Chief Newsom and some other people and have this conversation again.
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. And one of the things I actually had written down was to follow up specifically with you, Commissioner Hampton, and think about how, you know, perhaps the next meeting you could be included on a panel and bringing in MPD and other folks that we and welcome input from commissioners after the meeting to have a conversation about what this potentially could look like. I also wanted to just run down a couple of things that I heard in the conversation today that I think are really strong takeaways as we're thinking about recommendations, as we're thinking about the next meeting. So one is and we've heard this in different ways and definitely came to the surface today, is that there is a need for an increase in investment in resources, specifically for frontline workers like violence interrupters. And even potentially one idea that arose that I think actually is really interesting and worth delving into is thinking about, you know, investing in violence interrupters, but also the creation of something new, like trauma teams. That can be alternative responses, like that's what we're about. That doesn't include law enforcement at all, specifically when it comes to responding to some of the interpersonal incidences or incidents that are more about addiction or mental health challenges and emergencies. So that was the first thing. The second was a need to have some flexibility specifically for folks like violence interrupters to be able to respond to incidences across neighborhoods, across communities, right? To be able to have that flexibility to be in every part of DC as folks move and are being transient. And then third, that specifically around some of the commissioners' questions about the role of drugs or the drug market in violence in DC, that really what we're responding to is addiction, which the response should be what? Service, and not to the illegal sale of drugs anymore. Like that's not really what we're seeing. And so the responses should shift in that way. And then fourth, we talked at the beginning about the role of gentrification and also affordable housing and vouchers. And I thought that there was a really good idea put out there on the table that, you know, there should be some sort of process or infrastructure in place as people move as a result of having housing vouchers that interact with some of our questions about how violence moves across neighborhoods. And then finally, one of the other things that we talked about, I think gets to the questions of community transformation, but also investment, right? That there really is a need to target our resources and interventions on those individuals who both who are perpetrators of violence, but also have been victimized themselves. Recognizing that they are one, human beings worth investing in, right? And actually have the privilege of being able to be a victim, right? Or being able to be a human being. And so I think that gets to sort of the broader request that that Bob and others brought up in terms of thinking about this in a way that's holistic and providing those types of resources. So we also talked about a few other things, but those seem to be some of the top line from or takeaways from our, and then the last thing that came up was around the training, right? Like there's a role of education when it's coupled with changing the actual structures and incentive structures that are in place, that those two coupled together can be a really powerful tool for reform. Commissioner Hampton, did you have something before we?
I had a question, Tony. You talked about
yes, sir.
You talked about the transference of information or being able to look into a system, I guess, and see whether or not somebody's been if some of the violence interrupters are working with the same person you're working with. And the reason that I asked you that in the system that I work in the one of the collaboratives in the system. So as a manager, so if I have a family and I'm doing case management with the family, I'm privy to information within the system that we use to document what we do with that family to see if they've had services from other collaboratives and even from CFSA, for example. We even are in that system. So do you all use some sort of system where you enter information regarding what it is that you all do when you're providing services or connecting families with services and resources?
Well, Ms. Ham, you know, I'm not a violence interrupter, but I know they do. From my and Wayne could probably answer this better than I, but just in my experience, obviously there is case notes and they do input data into some system. My suggestion would be like a cross agency, cross CBO database to be created where everybody would have eyes on the individual. So if Mr. Hampton, I'm your client, Tony Lewis, you put me in, you put in my social, you can see all in real time all of the other entities that are working with me at the same time. Now, some of that information, it may not even be relevant to you, but then it may be some folk that's working with that individual that you feel like, yo, I need to jump on the phone with these people for one, not to duplicate services, but also to make sure that we're supporting this person in the best way possible. So that's sort of what the suggestion that I made sort of was framed around that.
But let me ask you this: do you think that if one of the recommendations would be that if we take all of this violence interrupters, all the people who do the kind of work that violence interrupters do, incredible messengers, even the roving leader program, because they do some of this too, and put it all in one agency in the city, and then you would have in that agency all the technology, everything that you need to be able to do it, as well as work with the guys to develop more skills around case management, because that's exactly what they're doing. They just
Mr. Hammond, I kind of, that's kind of what I was saying earlier. I just ain't want to put no extra work on my friends, but
that's what I thought.
I think that at this point, I do think that that's probably the best scenario for the whole violence interruption infrastructure to come out of the Office of Neighborhood Engagement and Safety. Like, I really feel that way. I feel like that's the best way that we could monitor it, support it. And I think you just brought up an excellent point around also, because I think I want Wayne to tell you, Booby to tell you, I to the violence interrupters, I always say this. It also has to be about education and training and growth for them. I would so much love, as we talk about the need for mental health supports, behavioral health interventions, I would so love to see funding put up where violence interrupters can actually become the mental health practitioners, because I think it's a level of trauma and a type of trauma that people are not being trained for, and that the eyes and the ears and the expertise that the violence interrupters embody, coupled with the education they had them in becoming a psychologist or whatever the case may be, would be incredible. And that's where we can see these people really start to be more comfortable, and we can normalize mental health interventions, because it will be done by people that they know and people that they trust. That's part of the biggest gap in a lot of the mental health supports, that it's strangers, it's people that's not from the community, people that don't necessarily understand what it's like to be shot, people that don't understand what it's like to go to prison, people that don't understand what it's like to grow up in an impoverished community. So I know that's not the subject matter, but I think we need to be thinking that far, like to be able to create something that's going to work. Because I've seen a lot of like theoretical, like genius stuff be created on paper. When you talk about application and really penetrating the DC population, it falls short. And I think because it has not included the people that we're talking about.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony. Thanks.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And thanks for everything you do, Ms. I appreciate you always. You know it.
Thank you.
Well, I am grateful for everyone who engaged, and definitely for our guests today. And again, as Commissioner Knight said, I think that this can be the beginning, or should be the beginning, of an ongoing conversation that grows and informs the work that we're doing as we move forward. I also will add that the last round of conversation reminded me of the last takeaway that I had, because there's 7 that I wrote down, which is around breaking down silos and the need for the sharing of data and information. So thank you for that, because I forgot to mention that. And that sort of gets to a lot of things we've heard from other speakers actually about the need for, cross-agency collaboration and how that would be helpful in serving the populations that need these services the most. So in terms of No need to apologize. The conversation today was really great. Thank you. So in terms of our next steps, so in planning for the next meeting, I heard a few things in terms of content and wanting to continue this conversation and include MPD. And I think it also would be helpful to include a couple of the agencies that I think have been brought up in thinking about where we need to draw resources and services from. Because one of the themes is that, you know, in addressing violence and victimization, which I think I feel like we need to even change the name of the of this committee. So really reflect that more. But anyway, after this conversation, right, like we're talking about yeah, anyway, but that in doing that, that we have to actually change the material conditions of people's lives and meet their basic needs.
Right.
Like, period. And that whatever structure we put in place, whether it's a violence interrupter, a trauma team, whoever that person is, whoever that FTE is, has to not just be able to build relationships and show up when a shooting happens or if it's going to happen, but they have to be able to be connected to and to be able to connect that person directly and almost immediately to real resources. Right. And not just like promises of a resource, but like a real thing, like a job, like, you know, actual cash, you know, I'm putting stuff out there because I like to dream, like actual cash assistance, the ability to pay your bills, you know, the ability to have access to affordable housing, right? An ability to dream and have opportunity and have a future. And I think that that's a really powerful takeaway from our conversation today. And even thinking about how we want to set up additional conversations and meetings in the future. So let's see. So is there anything else from any of the commissioners before we close out the meeting today? All right.
You did a wonderful job, Lucinda.
Oh, I'm just sitting here.
No.
And you know, and it's funny, I ordered McDonald's, y'all. It's COVID, the election's tomorrow, and McDonald's is literally across the street, and I just got chicken nuggets. So I'm really, that's my COVID coping mechanism.
Very productive meeting, and I learned a lot.
Mr. Bennett, she did a fantastic job. And
I want to thank Corwin. I want to thank Corwin Knight for organizing this, for bringing his expertise and the expertise of his colleagues. I think that this has been, at least for me, one of the most invaluable conversations that we've had so far as a community. So thank you so much for putting this together.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, and I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett. I love where this is going, in the direction it's going at. I think we can really accomplish a lot from this right here. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to this dialogue. This is a strong, I think this is like, again, this is one of the most, and I'm not saying overall, I'm just saying that, like, I see this is going in a good direction. It's a lot of information we have obtained from this, and I think we can really use this for some recommendations for the council members.
No, absolutely. There's two more things that I just want to make sure that we keep on our radar that has come up, two more topics that are very specific. One is, and Chris brought this up, is gendered violence and domestic violence as well. So I want to make sure that we are, in responses to that, so I want to make sure that we are making space for that as well in some of our upcoming meetings in terms of content and information. So I just want to bring that back to the fore. But thank you all so much for your time, and be as well as you can be.
Vote.
Thank you, Tony and Charles and Wayne also, who's gone now. But thank you very much for being here.
Our pleasure. Y'all have a great day. Be safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everybody.
Thanks, Corey.
All right, bro. Talk to you in a little while. Peace.